Hey, welcome to Vortex Garage. In today's video, our subject is once again going to be our Triumph Spitfire restoration project. Now this video is going to serve two main purposes. Number one, you're going to get a little bit of an update of where we are with our restoration. But number two, we're going to talk about a pretty critical item when it comes to starting some reassembly. Let's talk about that first. So whether or not you've already done some restorations, maybe you're in the process of doing one, or well, you're even just thinking about starting one. Well, you're either going to have or you do have several boxes like this. And those boxes are going to be full of these Ziploc bags because you were smart. When you did your disassembly, you took all the small bits and pieces and you threw them in bags and labeled them. So whether it takes you days, weeks, months, or heck, even years to get back to some of this stuff, you can pull it out and know exactly what you have. So here we go. This bag right here, body bolts for the front. The long ones are the outer, short ones are the inner. This one actually has a little note on it, which is cool. And that's great because if I had just taken these bolts and thrown them in a bucket and come back later, and I would have never known what these bolts go for. It would have taken me hours to figure out where they thread into, and I might not even get it correct. So by doing this, I certainly know where everything goes. All right, and that's all fine and dandy, right? Well, let's talk a little bit and kind of merge things in here. We'll talk about our restoration and where we are with it and kind of tie everything back in. So you've known from some of our recent updates that we just had our body sent off to Media Blast and it's come back. We showed you all the metal work that needs to be done, and well, it's fairly substantial, of course, and it's going to be a pretty long process to get that taken care of. And well, you've seen in some earlier updates, we've also got a nice chassis sitting over there. It's powder coated. We've got a lot of brackets and A-arms and suspension pieces ready to go. And of course, here on the table, we've bought pieces. We've got a lot of wear items for the suspension, bearings, bushings, seals, ball joints, trunnions, shocks, springs, all that good stuff. So the big thing to think about is where do we go next? So obviously the priority is going to be the body work because, well, this body is nowhere near ready to join the chassis again. So we've got to get this kind of back in order and make sure we're moving ahead. But that's sort of the concern, right? And the concern is this: project burnout. Now we all know what project burnout is in a restoration. And if you don't, well, we'll educate you here. Essentially what that is when you do some job on it that maybe you don't find as much enjoyment in, or it just kind of drags on, or something doesn't go quite right, or it doesn't go as well as you think it should, and you end up kind of getting tired of it. And then you shelve the project for a couple weeks, which turns into a couple months, which turns into sometimes indefinitely. Well, we don't want that to happen. Now, one way, of course, is to just be vigilant. Make sure that you do small chunks and you keep yourself motivated. But we're going to hedge our bets. I think another way to help fend off project burnout is to make sure that we've got parallel projects that we can work on. That way, if we get tired of doing one thing, we can shift over and do the other. That's exactly what we're going to do. So obviously our priority is going to be doing the metal work and the body work on this to get it prepped. But we're also going to start building up that rolling chassis. And the idea is this: maybe I don't have enough time. Maybe I've only got 30 minutes and I want to wrench on something. I can't really come out here, pull out all the tools, all the cutting stuff, make a mess, cut panels. I'd run out of time before I was even prepped. But I could go wrench on that rolling chassis and get some things done. If I get tired of this, I could move over and do that. The whole idea is that progress will be made on the car, even if it's not on this piece right here. It'll be on another aspect of it. So we're continually pushing it forward. Now, I talked about all the stuff we have for that rolling chassis and all the powder-coated parts, all the bits that we bought here. So we've got pretty much everything to start doing that and put it back together. So let's get rolling on it, right? Well, that's the problem. Pretty much everything isn't everything. And well, let's see. Here's a key example right here. This is a front rotor assembly for a Spitfire. It's got the spindle on the back. It's got the bearing carriers. It's got the rotor. And of course, that's where the trunnions and the bushings and the ball joints attached to at the top of the spindle for the upper. And well, this part is old. It needs to be refurbished. And well, you might look at it and say, well, hey, you bought all these parts from the catalog. Why don't you just buy that too? And granted, there are some cars that you can literally build out of a catalog, but a lot of cars you can't get everything out of a catalog, nor would you want to. Even with those ones that you can build everything out of a catalog, you got to have some seriously deep pockets. Now, some of the parts, like these wear items, they're pretty reasonable in price. But when you get to something like a spindle, if you need a spindle, it's a little bit more expensive. Now, if you don't need a spindle because you have a perfectly fine one that just needs some refurb, well, that's what you're going to do. You're going to refurb that part and get it ready. And that's what we got to do. So to get our rolling chassis ready, we've got to take some of these larger parts that we have not yet refurbed and get them fixed up. Take these apart, strip them down, rebuild them with new trunnions, put the new bearings in, of course, get them mounted up with the new bushings and new ball joints. And we're going to have some cool video as we do that on our project here. So that's great, all right? So we're going to need to get that taken care of. But there's another key aspect to it, and that is the hardware. All right, so the hardware is the nuts and bolts of the items here. Now, we did buy some new hardware, and this is an option that you can do. So we got these from Victoria British. This is new hardware. I think this is for some of the front suspension components. And that's great. It's nice and shiny. I don't have to worry about cleaning it up. I know where it goes. It's pretty cool. But if you look at this hardware, there's a couple concerns, and I know the camera's a little far away here, but well, this hardware doesn't look exactly like the stuff that came off. This is new hardware, but it's slightly different. So there might be some reasons you decide you don't want to buy new hardware. Number one, maybe it's cost prohibitive. Number two, maybe they don't have hardware for the specific piece you're looking for. Number three, you're doing a very correct restoration and you need to make sure that you have the original OE bolts. And of course, number four, not all of them are like this. So these are great. These are bolts that go through the suspension, have a nut on the other side. So it's pretty easy. You could go to a hardware store and make these up. But what about when you have the threads inside the frame or welded to a boss somewhere? And that bolt is a very specific pattern. Maybe it's an older style, British pattern or whatnot. Well, you're going to have to reuse your original stuff. And that's where you're going to have the problem because, hey, we're going to refurbish these and make these look all brand new and perfect. We've got all these nice new parts and everything, but, well, let's take a look at these bolts again. I mean, the bag turned red. The bag's orange because of all the rust on it. So you're going to use these nasty, rusty bolts on all this cool, shiny stuff? No, not at all. And it's worse than that, though. There's not just bolts. There's also little brackets that you're going to reuse. You're not going to buy every little bracket. You're going to reuse a lot of that stuff. And it was stuff that you took off the car when it got sandblasted. It wasn't on the frame when that got powder coated. So you need to start taking care of that stuff. And that's where we are from an update perspective and really what this video is about. How do you handle these small pieces? How do you get them refurbished? And what are your steps for cleaning them up? So first off, when it comes to things like this, we're going to get to the stage where we're going to have to start painting some stuff and deciding if we also want to do another batch of powder coating. And we have the option of some of the Eastwood stuff, like maybe the home powder coating kits. We have a place nearby here that also does powder coating, and I could easily take a batch of parts. But what about painting? I don't really want to do rattle can stuff, so I'm going to have to make sure I get a decent compressor and I can do some nice catalyzed paint if I need to do that. Well, we're a little ways away from that. Let's not get too sidetracked on that. I like to ramble, you know that. But let's talk about these bits as they stand right now. These aren't ready to paint, right? Even if we were going to paint these bolts or we were going to paint a bracket or even powder coat them, they're not ready to go. They need to be blasted. They need to be cleaned up. So now you're faced with the problem. Do you take all these little bags down to your sandblaster and say, hey, can you clean these up for me? And you pay hours of labor to get that done. Or maybe you've got a nice big compressor and you go out and you buy a blast cabinet and you buy some media for that. Well, that's one way to go. Well, we don't have one of those. And a lot of you don't have one of them either. So what are your options? Now we're finally into what this video is about. We're going to talk about some of the other options that you have for refurbing small parts and cleaning them up without a blast cabinet. Maybe one day we'll add a blast cabinet, but for right now, we're going to look at some options for cleaning these up. So I'll tell you what, let's rejoin you over on this workbench, and if you've seen some of the stuff over there, you kind of know where this is heading. Let's rejoin and take a look at some of our options. We'll take these with us. All right, so we're here at our workbench, and we've got two things that I think you'd probably find if you were looking for an alternative to a blast cabinet. Maybe you were searching online and looking for things to clean small parts. Well, this is probably two of the things that you'd find in that. What we've got here is an ultrasonic cleaner, and back here we've got a vibratory tumbler. So what we're going to do, of course, I'm going to grab the other camera here. We'll give you a quick close-up view of each one, and we'll talk briefly about them. But then we're going to put them to use, and we're going to compare how they handle some of these nuts and bolts and little brackets and whatnot, and you'll get to see what comes out at the end, and that'll help you make a decision on which one's right for you. So we'll grab the camera, and of course we've got our ultrasonic cleaner right here, and essentially what this does is it's just got a little basket and a tub in it, and we've got some water in it right now, and we're just going to use this general purpose cleaner, and we're going to put that in there. We'll put the parts in, and you kind of set your timer. This one will go from 90 all the way up to 480 seconds, and it does some ultrasonic vibrations, and that sort of shakes loose the debris, the grease, dirt, and all that, and cleans them up. Now, important to note, the cleaning solution that you use is important, because this particular one does note that if you use it on magnesium alloys or aluminum, you can have discoloration. And you have to know that there are some cleaners that are not friendly to aluminum parts. And a lot of us have aluminum parts that we're trying to clean up. So be very careful with that if you're using this, or even a parts washer. Parts washer, by the way, whole nother video we're gonna do. Anyway, back to the ultrasonic cleaner. We're gonna rig this up and do it, but the essential thing is, and what I think you're gonna see, is that the ultrasonic cleaner is really more for cleaning parts. It's not gonna take the rust off. It's not gonna take the scale off or the old paint. It's just gonna clean them up. All right, but we have that, and we'll show you. What we have here is a vibratory tumbler, and essentially what this does, and we've got some media to go with it. This is some tumbler media, and this is all from Harbor Freight, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But this tumbler media essentially goes in this basket, and then you put your parts in the basket, and you let this thing run, and it vibrates and shakes everything around, and it all tumbles around in there. And you basically get an abrasive action on the parts that are in here. And that's what we're looking for, because a blast cabinet is giving you the abrasive action of that media blast. This is sort of automating that and doing it in this drum here. So this is probably the one that's going to work better for cleaning up this old hardware and making it ready to use and paint and all that good stuff. But what you're going to want to do with this, of course, is you have to choose your tumbler media based on what kind of parts you're putting in here, what the kind of metal it is, and what do you want to do with it, because you can do everything from really hard cutting of rust to medium, rust cutting and abrasive, all the way to fine polishing. So you can even do some polishing in these. So this is kind of a multi-purpose thing. So we've got this tumbler media, which I'll put this down and we'll show you that in a second. And the idea is that we're going to show this. I think this is going to do a better job at cleaning up the bolts and brackets and getting them to the point we want them and mimicking that blast cabinet. All right, so with that camera aside, this is our tumbler media right here. And I'll just sort of walk closer to this camera to show you. And essentially this, again, goes in that basket over there, but it's kind of neat stuff. It's sort of like a resin, and it's in these form of these kind of green, hopefully you can see that, these green pyramids. And so you got these little, see right there, these green pyramid things. And we'll show you when we load it up, you'll get to see them in there as well. But the thing that I found funny about these when I got them is if you smell them, it smells like Bondo, right? So it brings back all the bad memories of stripping Bondo off the cars, and I guess working with it. But so interesting. I found that kind of ironic if we're using essentially Bondo to clean parts rather than Bondo to ruin parts. So at any rate, let's go ahead and get these loaded up. We'll fire them up and then we'll let them run. So we're going to need to grab the book for this one and determine, I think we're going to want to let this one run for a couple hours, whereas this one's only going to run for 480 seconds. So obviously there's a big disparity there, but that's just the nature of how these items work. Again, this is more for cleaning, this is more for refurbishing and rust removal and stripping the parts. So, might as well get started. What do we have here? So, all right, so I've got windshield frame bolts. I've got those body bolts for the front and rear, and well, that would be good to put in. And I've got some hood hinges. Hood hinge bolts. So these hood hinge bolts are pretty rusty. They're about as rusty as these body bolts, but I'd say maybe these are a little worse. So I'll put these in there. Of course, I'm going to take them out of the bag. I'm just getting them ready. The body bolts I'm going to put in here. It would be great to separate them, but I don't want to mix parts up. And that's the only issue you're going to have is if you load this hopper up with all kinds of various bits and bolts, you better know what it is when you pull them out. So that's probably the downside of it, right? If this takes an hour or so to clean parts and you can only do a bit at a time because you're going to forget what you put in there, that might be a bit of a problem for you. Okay, and then of course we got windshield frame. We'll save those for later because I got two brackets. These are matching brackets. One of them we're going to put in the ultrasonic cleaner. Hang on. Didn't break it. So, all right, one of them will go in the ultrasonic cleaner and the other one's going to go in our vibratory tumbler. So real quick note on this tumbler. This is the small version that they sell. I think it's a 5-pound capacity. and that's both the tumbler media and the parts you put in. They do have a larger one. It's considerably bigger, but it's also more expensive. So this one, I think out the door was under $50, and then the media is a couple bucks. The big one, it was like 150 or 160, I think. So for me, I decided, well, let's see what works, and I need to get some parts clean. Let's start with the cheap one, make sure this works for us. And kind of the nice thing about tools, if later on I regret buying the small one and wish I had the larger one, I can always upgrade. I can always sell this one online, make back some of that money, give it to someone else, or have it for small bits, who knows what. So, but this will fit most everything that I want to do in it right now. So I elected to go with the cheaper version so that I can kind of figure out how it works. And well, you get to see it as well. All right, let's go ahead and fill up our tumbler media. Grab our camera here. I'm just going to dump it all in, right? That's good. Maybe not all of it. All right, you can see these kind of green pyramids. Like I said, oh, it smells so much like Bondo right now. All right, so that's pretty much ready. Same thing with our ultrasonic cleaner. We're going to get our cleaner in here. It says to use a quarter tablespoon, and I don't have my quarter tablespoon with me, so we'll just put a little bit in. There, that's probably a little more than a quarter tablespoon, but that's all right. And the ultrasonic action will spread that around. I'm pretty confident in that. All right, we'll drop this bracket in. So this bracket actually looks like it's a little more greasy, whereas the other one looks a little more rusty. So I'm going to put this one where I think it can do the most good in the ultrasonic cleaner. And I'm going to take our body bolts, drop them in the ultrasonic cleaner. Put our lid on and go ahead and start it. All right, you can kind of hear it buzzing a little bit. This one, it doesn't really shake or vibrate or anything. Now, the ultrasonic cleaners will kind of tell you, I think there's like warnings on them if you've got a pacemaker, or you can even get like, I don't know if it like bubbles your blood up or something, but I know it was like the big industrial ones. They have a lot of warnings to stay away from them. I would check on these small ones too. They should have warning labels on them. Make sure you follow what's in the owner's manual. All right, anyway, let's put these in. We got some bolts and washers. I'm going to dump these in our tumbler here, and this bracket right here, we'll dump that in. So, show you in here, got all that kind of laid in. We'll mix it up a little bit. This piece, hopefully we can get it down in. Need to put a little more over top, you can. Hope I'm doing this right. I didn't read these instructions fully, so. All right, and then we'll go ahead and put our lid on. Watch me cross thread this wing nut. There we go. Okay, let's get this tightened down nice and good. Now, one thing it says in the instructions here, and the warnings are on the side too, is that after this runs, they actually recommend letting it sit for like an hour to let the dust settle. And if you think about it, if you've ever sanded a body and you've worn your respiratory stuff because you don't want to breathe any of that dust in, well, I'd imagine it's much the same. You're going to have bits from the abrasive material, you're going to have rust, you're going to have whatever else was in there as dust, so you're going to want to be careful of that. All right, let's switch this one on. All right, and that one's doing its thing. All right, so we got them both running. And hopefully you can still hear me, but what we're going to do, we're going to let these run. I'll check the book to find out how long our vibratory tumbler should run. And of course, we'll let this one run out. We'll be able to check that first, and then later on we'll compare that. So, magic of video, we'll rejoin you when these are all done, and we'll do a comparison of what comes out. All right, so we're back, and we can check out how things worked on our ultrasonic cleaner and our vibratory tumbler. So the ultrasonic cleaner is already done. That one, again, we only ran it, actually ran it twice. We did 2 of the 480-second bursts on it. And then the vibratory tumbler, that ran for about 6 hours. The book recommends with the resin material that we were using to do between 2 and 6 hours. But since we put some really rusty and pitted bolts in there, I went ahead and did the full 6. It was probably about 5.5 or so when it was all said and done. But I've got this camera here. Let's take a look at what came out of our ultrasonic cleaner. So you can certainly see the water in the ultrasonic cleaner is a lot dirtier than it was, and there's some particulate on the bottom. So it did a good job of degreasing and cleaning them. But let's go ahead and take a look at the parts as they are. So I gave them a little bit more of a burst as I was finishing up the tumbler, so they're still a little wet. But as you can see, they're actually quite clean, but there's still signs of rust. There's still paint on them from the factory. But if you're just looking for a clean piece of equipment, that did a pretty good job of actually cleaning and degreasing. Let's take a look at this bracket. All right, so this bracket still has some grease on it, so it would probably require another couple runs in it to really get it, but this had a lot of oil and grease on it, so it had a lot to get through. But as you can see, the paint is still present on this, and any rust is still present. So again, ultrasonic cleaner did a good job for actually cleaning the parts, but it didn't necessarily remove paint or remove rust. So this does serve a good purpose if that's what you're looking to do. All right, so on the vibratory tumbler, we've got it's sat for a while, so we've let the dust settle inside, and we've already taken the wing nut off, so it's a little easier to open. All right, so here's what we got inside. And right off the bat, I can see a washer in here. So we'll fish that out. And all right, so right off the bat, it kind of looks like, you can see a lot of the material on it. It's kind of dusty. So we're going to set them aside and then we'll clean them. I see the bracket right here. All right, so here's the bracket. Looks a lot different than the one that came out of our ultrasonic cleaner. And again, and I do have some bolts in here. Now, the thing to point out is what I should have done is split these bolts up and put some of them in the cleaner, some of them in here. They're actually 2 different sets of bolts in each one. These were the rustier, more pitted ones that were in here. So this machine had a tougher job to do. All right, so here's a nut. And we got a little bit of media stuck in it. We'll have to pry that out. And let me just try to find one of the bolts. That's probably one of the hard parts is, here's one. As we've got the material in here, you kind of have to fish around to get the stuff out. So you want to remember what you put in it, or you're going to have to clean this out and make sure you get everything. Here's another nut. And I was telling you earlier that this kind of smells of Bondo a little bit. It certainly does as you open it up, and that's why you want to let the dust settle. All right, I'm pretty sure there's another couple bolts in here, but we've got enough out of it. And what we're going to do is kind of set that right here. We'll clean one of the bolts. We're just going to spray a little cleaner on it. I'm going to set this camera down so I can use 2 hands. I'm just going to clean these up with some cleaner just to get all the dust off from the tumbler and kind of see what it is that we have. Okay. Here's our bolt and our other bolt. A little bit more cleaner. Okay, so one thing, of course, as we're cleaning these, this thing's pretty loud. I don't remember if we ran it on camera much, but it's not super loud, but it definitely has a good amount of noise to it. So more than likely, if you're working in the shop as this is running, you're going to want to put it somewhere where it's not going to bother you. Heck, run it outside, run it in another room, put it somewhere where you can kind of let it run and not be bothered by it, because it does make a little bit of noise. Alternatively, you could run it overnight or something like that. I preferred kind of keeping an eye on it since it was the first time I'd used it, and it is from Harbor Freight. As much as I like Harbor Freight, I want to make sure the stuff that I get there is operating correctly before I rely on it. All right, so let's take a look at what we have with this camera. I'm going to take the bracket from the ultrasonic cleaner, put it down here as a comparison. Okay, and hopefully we can get it to focus correctly. Now, hopefully you can see that. You can kind of see the difference in here. So obviously, this one has been degreased a fair amount. It is cleaner, but all the paint and any rust that was on it is pretty much still there. The one from the Tumbler, that's more bare metal. So this actually did a pretty good job of abrasively removing a fair amount of the stuff. Now it's still got some material on it, you can see here on the inside, because it is a weird shape. It's got some pretty sharp angles, so for the abrasive media to get in there, you know, for the abrasive media to get in there, it definitely, you know, would require a little bit more time. The bolts, again, you can see some pitting on these. I don't know how well you'll be able to see them up close on the camera here. Hopefully it focuses. So you can definitely see where the rust had affected the shank of the bolt. The threads, though, are in good shape. The nice thing about this particular resin material, it does not damage the threads. And by the look of these, these could probably exist in there for another couple hours and get even cleaner. But what I do see is enough shiny stuff to say that it has worn these down a little bit. This is a little bit more base metal rather than the coating that was on them. Let's grab some of the bolts from here. These are, again, all original bolts to the car. So there are some different things on them. So you can see the original coating on here versus this one right here. So you can see that that coating kind of has largely been removed. All right, so that's pretty much it and the difference between these two things. So I would say in conclusion that if you're looking for an automated way to kind of clean up the rust and paint off of small brackets and hardware, getting a vibratory tumbler with this resin media is a good way to go. So you can let it sit, you can let it run, and it sort of takes care of it. If you're looking to degrease and clean parts, an ultrasonic cleaner definitely has its place. So these bolts are getting close to where we can go ahead and refinish them and reuse them if we want. And these bolts right here, well, these are nice and clean, and we could certainly do some more stuff with them. So there is one more tool that we're going to show you to kind of wrap things up here, and I'm sure a lot of you were thinking of it as we started to talk about these tools for rust removal and cleanup of little stuff like this. And that is a grinder with a wire wheel on it. So the grinder with the wire wheel, we're going to go over and use it, but one thing with that, obviously you're going to want to wear gloves, use pliers or whatever. It's kind of tedious, takes a lot of time, you got to sit there and do them. We'll probably end up using that a fair bit. We'll also use our vibratory tumbler when it makes sense to use it. And when we need to just clean some stuff, we've got our ultrasonic cleaner. So we've got kind of three things that we can use, and we didn't have to invest in the expense of a blast cabinet. So let me stop the camera. We're going to fire up the grinder, and we're going to do some quick wire wheel work with another part, and we'll see how that comes out. All right, so I got my cool safety goggles on because you got to be safe when you're doing this stuff. And let me tell you, when you're using one of these wire wheels, even if you've got the guard here and most of the stuff's shooting down, it's very possible that something could skirt by and hit you in the eye. And even these little wire brush pieces will come off and hit you. And take it from experience, I've had that happen. I'm very close to having a problem, and I've learned from it. So you'll see a lot of people not do that, but it's a good idea to do it. So we're going to use this grinder, and we've got the brush wheel on it. And I just found this part. This is actually a sway bar end link, but it's got a threaded piece on it, which hopefully you can see, and it's about as rusty as some of the other parts that we did. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit this on the wire wheel, clean it up a little bit, and you'll get to see how that looks compared to some of the other methods we did. The nice thing about this, it'll go a lot faster, but it is a lot more manual effort. All right, so let this spool up. All right, we'll just do that a little bit from now, and so you can see one of the difficult, well, let me let it spool down. As you can see, one of the more difficult parts of doing this is that, you know, with this piece right here, it's a bit awkward to try to get it at the right spot where I don't get my hand caught in everything, but it works really good. So let's take a look at it on camera. As you can see, that wire brush will really dig down straight to bare metal pretty easily. The big thing that you have to be careful of with that is that you don't damage the threads on it. There is always that potential. So you got to be careful, but at the same time you got to have some firm pressure to clean it up. Let's do it one more time. We'll clean up this ball end just to show you. We'll do some really light pressure on it. All right, let it cool down again. We'll go ahead and show you on camera. So we're pretty much letting the tool do the work. As you can see, very quickly it took all the rust, dirt, scale off, and we're down to some bare metal. So this is definitely an option that we'll use for a lot of brackets, parts, nuts and bolts or whatnot. The key is to be careful, let the tool do the work. But in other cases where you just want to throw a bunch of stuff in and have it automated, those other tools over there work pretty well. All right, so that's pretty much going to wrap us up for today's video. So hopefully this was kind of handy. You got to see where we are on some of the restoration, and we're starting to clean up these small parts so we can do a rebuild on that chassis. But also you learned a little bit, if you don't want to invest in a blast cabinet, what are all the alternatives for cleaning up some of these parts that you're going to reuse? And of course, we ended here with the grinder with the wire wheel, which is a great option for some quick cleaning of parts. But we've also got the automated stuff like that abrasive vibratory tumbler, and of course our ultrasonic cleaner when you just need to clean up some small stuff. So I hope that was helpful, and definitely if you enjoyed this video and others here at Vortex Garage, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll be posting some new videos soon. Thanks, have a good one.